In ancient times, the government began implementing a policy of expelling strange objects and monsters on a large scale. People called this practice monster purification, and the young man known as the Demon Slayer worked for a circus. It wasn't really a circus, but more like an arena for entertaining people outside. The circus leader accidentally bought a captured goblin to use as a performer, and in this circus, most weren't human but demons and monsters. The next morning, he went out for a walk and was followed by a group of children. He scared them off, making them run away in fear. He then bought a bottle of beer and saw people beating a cat, thinking it was a demon. Since the Demon Slayer was there, they asked him to deal with it, but he thought it was just a cat, so he didn't hit it but just flicked it to shoo it away. Although people enjoyed watching him fight monsters, they didn't like to associate with him in real life. That night, he went on stage again, and coincidentally, that cat was actually a monster. After the performance, he left the stage and realized he was being followed. The girl following him ran out when she didn't see him in the room and was caught by him. He wanted to know what was in that cage, so he approached, causing her to counterattack. She took out a gun, but he approached again and kept the gun on the ground. He soon subdued her when a voice from the cage told him to spare this maid. The maid then put away the gun and picked up the cage. The voice inside knew who he really was. He was a half-demon who had been experimented on and had many demons implanted in his body. He also found it hard to stay sane, and using demon power every day would soon cause him to be consumed by demons. The voice wanted to make a deal with him. The cage was then unveiled, revealing the head of a girl. She was immortal, named Aya, and she asked him to kill her. In return, she would give him a way to prolong his life. She had lived for over 900 years, and demons were the only creatures that could nullify her immortality. But the one who harmed her was a half-demon, so his power was only half and couldn't completely kill her. A year ago, she was approached by a half-demon who took her body. She couldn't see his face but only saw his master, an old foreigner with a hoarse voice and a cane. She wanted to find that person but had no clues, so she came to him. As a half-demon with more demon than human, she wasn't sure if he could kill her. He then wanted to go somewhere else to discuss, because it would be troublesome if the theater owner found them and made him perform again. He then told his name for easier communication. He was Sinachi. Aya then wondered why he craved life while continuing to perform despite knowing he would soon be consumed by demons. He admitted he knew this, but performing and becoming a demon was part of his intention. If he lost his mind and turned into a demon while performing, the people who always saw him as entertainment would be the first victims, and he wanted to see how many he could kill before being stopped. That was the way of dying he thought was the most fun and could rectify this society. But when she said there was a way to help him prolong his life, he abandoned that idea. However, he said straight out that he wouldn't kill her because she didn't really want to die, but was just bored of living with only a head. But he was willing to help her get her body back because the old man who stole her body was the one who had turned him into this state. The old man's cane had the letter M engraved on it, and Aya confirmed this was correct. So now the deal changed. Aya knew her body was in Europe, which meant they would have a long journey to find it. He then asked Aya about the way he could prolong his life, and Aya told him he just needed to eat a part of her body. But of course, nothing on this head was allowed. She realized that bodily fluids also worked, so she asked if he preferred sweat or saliva. He chose the latter, and Aya asked him to bring his face forward. They used this kiss as a contract to cooperate with each other. Meanwhile, in France, two vampire father and son were hunting deer. The father wanted to use a gun but couldn't keep up with the deer's speed, so he rushed to catch it by hand. The son asked his father why he brought a gun if he couldn't use it, and he replied that it was a gift from the mayor, so he had to try it out. Vampires had begun interacting with humans since Count Dracula's demise, as living with humans seemed safer than confronting them. Upon returning, the son asked why his father kept silver items, and he said it was to prevent other hunters from using them against them. When entering the storage, he discovered a silver bullet stained with vampire blood and frantically went to find the family members. He found his eldest son and the butler, and when asked about his wife and youngest daughter, he learned his wife was in the room and his youngest daughter was singing with the maid. There had been no signs of intruders. He went to find his wife in the room and was heartbroken to find she had passed away with a gunshot wound. Days later, journalists began coming to the house to find him. He was Count Goddard, and because he had lived for 20 years without drinking human blood, he had the rights of a citizen. But there were still some extremists and discriminatory elements targeting him. He was then surrounded by journalists. He didn't want to say anything to the press, but a young girl named Annie, also a journalist, asked what he wanted to do about this case. He decided to hire a detective because the police were too careless. Hearing about the detective he hired, Annie suspected he had hired the duo Aya and Sanachi to investigate and solve the case, which he confirmed was correct. The two were now being taken by horse carriage to meet Count Goddard. According to him, they had solved several monster-related cases before. Although their identities and the truth were still somewhat vague, they were at least more trustworthy than the police. Upon arrival, Sanachi haggled with the coachman. He bargained about the bumpy ride, asking for a slightly lower price. Aya wanted him to stop bullying the poor man, but he still insisted on reducing the price by 1 coin, which the coachman had to accept. But Sanachi didn't have money, so he told the coachman to get the money from the count. The coachman then went in crying to the count about being bullied by Sanachi. The count told the butler to go get the money to pay. Sanachi introduced himself to the count, and when the count heard Aya's voice, he thought it was the maid Shizuku speaking. But Aya asked Shizuku to go put away their luggage, confusing the count even more as he couldn't tell where Aya's voice was coming from. When they officially got down to business, Sanachi lifted the veil and showed the count and his 2 sons that Aya only had a head, and she could still live healthily. Because she only had a head, she could only use her brain primarily. She asked the count to recount the entire crime scene. He took them to his wife's room to examine the scene there. Because vampire bodies decompose very quickly, his wife had already been buried, but there were still photos. Looking at them, it appeared that his wife had been stabbed in the heart with something like a stake. There were no signs of struggle on her face, so she must have been sleeping at the time. This meant the killer had stabbed straight into her heart with a stake. The back of the chair wasn't scratched, and the fact that the killer could get past the vampire's keen senses showed they must have been very experienced. There were no external wounds, so the killer might have used holy water to conceal some things at the scene. The holy water bottle was still there with blood stains on the mouth. Another issue was the silver stake found in the storage, which only the count and the butler had keys to. If vampires touch silver, even through cloth, it causes a burning sensation that can't heal. From this, Aya deduced 7 points. 1. The killer must have been a close acquaintance to get past the lady's senses. 2. Why did the killer act at night when vampires are weakest during the day? 3. The lock on the storage was found broken, and why was the holy water bottle left behind? 4. How did the killer know about the silver stake in the storage, and know exactly where the lady's room was and when she slept? 5. Why did the killer put the silver stake back in the storage? At this point, the count started to feel dizzy. Suddenly, his youngest daughter came looking for him, but was scared away by Sanachi. Aya said she would reveal the 6th and 7th points later. She then had dinner with the count's entire family. The coachman was also invited to join, but he kept looking around suspiciously. He was quite surprised that Aya only had a head. The count's family only drank blood to maintain their strength, while others had normal dishes. Aya didn't need to eat at all. The count's family was skeptical of the 2 detectives' abilities and even thought they were both frauds and untrustworthy, although the count found them eccentric but very astute when investigating. Aya decided to show off a bit when the coachman asked how she knew he was having problems with his wife. He was an alcoholic but had been forbidden by his wife to drink for a long time. First, she looked at his shirt, which had some faded spots indicating he frequently spilled food on it, causing his wife to scrub it constantly. Only when drunk would one spill food so often. Second, although his beard was unshaven, his shirt was very neat with a button sewn back on, and he seemed to have not drunk for a week as his shirt hadn't been washed for a week. It was clear that his wife was fed up with a drunken husband, so he had to listen to keep the family peaceful. He knew he needed to cherish this attentive wife more, so he decided to quit drinking. The count's eldest son was convinced and thought she was like Detective Sherlock Holmes, Aya then asked more about the case. The body was discovered at 1:30, and the family had a habit of dining at midnight like this. At 12:30, his wife finished eating and went to her room to rest. After the meal, he went to meet his eldest son in the library to discuss town management. The youngest daughter was also there. Then he went hunting. When he entered the warehouse to get his gear, nothing was unusual. When he went out, his second son asked to go along, and they were together in the forest until they returned. He fired 3 shots at deer but missed. The eldest son also heard these 3 gunshots. After the father went hunting, the eldest son returned to the reading room and sent his sister to be watched by the maid. Aya asked the second son what he did during the time between the end of the meal and going hunting. Feeling suspected, he protested, but if innocent, there's nothing to be startled about. The second son was most suspicious because from 12:30 to 1 o'clock, he was just in his room and didn't hear any noise. Aya asked the maid what she did from 12:30 to 1:30. She said she was just cleaning up and then saw the young miss bothering her brother, so she played with the young miss until 1:30. In between, she went to the bathroom for about 1-2 minutes and came back. The youngest daughter confirmed this. As for the butler, he was just working and arranging the count's schedule. He was always alone during that time. After hearing the explanations, Aya found that the eldest son and the butler had no alibi. The reason she thought the culprit was someone in the house was because, as she had explained earlier, it was very difficult to explain if the killer was an outsider. The youngest daughter ran off, causing the maid to chase after her. They then finished the meal, and Aya asked Shijuku to monitor the 2 servants in this house. Since the eldest son was unlikely to be the culprit, he also came and threatened both of them about not being the one who killed his mother. Aya also knew he wasn't the culprit because she had observed everyone's hands during the meal, and the 3 vampires were not injured, proving they didn't hold the stake. For now, Aya needed to go find that stake to check. Meanwhile, Shijuku was monitoring the 2 servants in the count's house. It was 1 o'clock, so the butler wanted to go to work but was stopped by Shijuku. The maid informed that the count and Sanachi had gone into the forest, making the butler feel a bit uneasy and worried. Meanwhile, as they walked, the count was telling about how he had heard of a creature believed to be immortal and had lived for over 1,000 years. But Aya revealed that this immortal creature also had a weakness: demons. Demons could kill immortals but had very poor defense and could die just from a bullet. Humans had exterminated almost all demons, and very few remained now. The count realized that they were both talking about themselves, a demon and an immortal. Both knew they were exposed, so they didn't hide it anymore. Suddenly, the count was ambushed, so he turned off the lights and asked permission to rush and catch that person. He caught the hunter very quickly and thought he had killed his wife. But Aya asked him to spare this person. The sleeve of this person was covered in coal dust, proving he had been on a train for a long time. He said he came here to avenge a hunter who had been killed by the count. But that person had attacked the count first, so he was only defending himself. He then recounted the story of that hunter, who had planned to kill the count and was very confident because he had help. That hunter had brought a stake, and he didn't even know the stake was made of silver. Aya wanted the count to let this person go because he had learned a lesson. Aya revealed that thanks to that hunter, she no longer needed to wander in the forest. She wanted him to return and gather everyone so she could solve the case. Upon returning, Aya announced that the killer was one of the people present. The eldest son didn't want to believe it, but the count wanted to hear her out first. She revisited 7 suspicions. First, the killer was someone familiar, so they could outwit the countess. Second, the killer acted at night instead of during the day. Third, the killer left the bottle at the scene. Fourth, the killer knew the schedule in the castle well. Fifth, the killer deliberately left the silver stake in the warehouse. The 6th suspicion was about sound. When the countess was killed, the eldest son and the butler were near her room but heard nothing, which was too strange. Both had no alibi but were unlikely to be accomplices, so she suspected the crime occurred before 1 o'clock. The killer must have placed something in between to muffle the sound of the stake being driven in. But the scene only had a coat, so the killer might have only used wrist force to do it. Why didn't the killer use a hammer to drive the stake? Even though hearing hammer sounds wouldn't be unusual as the countess often repaired furniture. Perhaps the culprit feared the hammer would damage the stake. This led to the conclusion that the stake that caused the murder was not made of silver. The silver stake the Count saw in the warehouse might have just been blood-stained as a decoy. But what material could cause the Countess's death, yet be easily broken if hammered? She set that aside to move to the seventh suspicion. The bottle she found in the Countess's room wasn't actually used to hold holy water. Because the bottle was dirty and not cleaned on the outside, it must have been dirty inside. If it contained water, how could it be dirty? So the bottle must not have contained water from the start and was just placed at the scene as a fake. But the Countess's wound showed signs of being damaged by holy water. From this, she deduced that the culprit must have frozen holy water into a stake to commit the crime. They used the coat at the scene to cover the blood splatter. The stake quickly melted and injured the Countess's skin. The culprit took the Countess's blood and waited for the Count to go hunting, then went to the warehouse and staged a fake crime scene. The purpose was to make the Count misunderstand the time of the crime as after 1 o'clock, not before. So the person without an alibi from 12:30 to 1 o'clock would be the culprit. 2 people met this criteria, the maid and the second son. But that person had to be strong enough to drive the stake and have a short time to create a fake crime scene. The most suspected person was still the second son. The second son argued that he was a vampire and couldn't hold silver stakes or holy water. That was true, but if the culprit had cut off their own hand and regenerated it, it would be different. From this, it could be certain that the second son was the killer. He immediately became nervous and lunged at Aya, but was caught by Sanachi and thrown out. According to Aya, the reason the second son was the culprit was because he was also opposed to and hated humans. But the Count chose to befriend humans, so he created this case to make him come to his senses. He was the one who contacted the hunter and created an opportunity for that hunter to attack the Count and steal the iron stake and container. Since the Count's family frequently visited the church, he could easily take holy water and put it in the hunter's iron stake container, then leave it in the forest at night to freeze. The rest was as seen. The second son was now trying to attack Sanachi, but he was no match for him. Sanachi beat the second son thoroughly while recounting his own biography to him. As they finished cleaning up, he returned to Aya. She and Sanachi were about to leave, and as dawn was approaching, the young journalist Annie arrived. The girl and Sanachi's group knew each other from before, so she was aware that Aya only had a head. Sanachi suggested that if she wanted to inquire about the case, she should ask the butler. Shijuku and Sanachi started chasing each other again, while Aya asked the Count if he was okay. He had lost a wife and now a son, but he still had to reveal the truth to the whole world. Aya asked him about the person with the cane, if he had met that person recently and was invited to London, but he had declined. With a new lead, Sanachi and Aya continued their journey. Meanwhile, on a train, 2 new characters appeared. The white-haired one was known as the Phantom of the Opera, and the blonde one had a request for the Phantom to carry out to steal a diamond from a museum in London where Detective Sherlock Holmes was operating. The Phantom accepted the job. At this point, Sanachi's group and Aya had arrived in London. According to the English press, the person who hired the Phantom of the Opera was the master thief Lupin. The journalist Annie had also followed them there. Sanachi's group was heading to a cane shop to request a customer list. As they left and entered an alley, they encountered 2 men who wanted the customer list Sanachi was carrying. Suddenly, they were caught by the police and taken to a car. In the car, there was also a pair of twins who had been arrested. Aya and the other man recognized these 2 as thieves due to their red wrists from carrying heavy objects and sawdust under their nails, indicating they had been carrying heavy ceramic items. Their correct deduction caused one of them to inadvertently confess. The newspaper reported that a famous figure known as the Iron Man was hiring detectives to investigate the thief Lupin who was targeting his treasure. Coincidentally, the 2 detectives he hired were Aya and Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes was the one traveling with them in this car. When the police realized this, they turned the car towards the Iron Man's mansion. At the mansion, we learned that the Iron Man and his butler had set a record for flying around the world in 80 days. Annie, now outside the mansion gate, was excited to see the 2 famous detectives. At the same time, the Phantom of the Opera had also heard this news. When they met the Iron Man, he wasn't too surprised to meet Aya, as he had heard of the immortal person. Aya thought she only investigated monsters, so this case might not be much help. But to him, the master thief Lupin was no different from a monster. The two detectives still thought two of them were excessive, but they proceeded with the case. The master thief Lupin had sent a letter announcing that between 11 o'clock and 11:30 on the 19th, he would come to steal the diamond named the Penultimate Night. The reason for this name was because the diamond was black. It was valuable and had never been displayed, kept in a fortified basement below and surrounded by a moat. To the south, there was a canal and an underground canal, large enough for a person to enter. Sherlock had the area closed off. The diamond was protected by over 100 guards and police, along with the two detectives and two representatives from a 2,000-year-old insurance cooperative. According to Lupin's investigation, the cooperative had 7 strongest members who would take all measures to protect their clients. They all wore white and were extremely skilled. The first to arrive to protect the Iron Man was Representative number 5, Reinhold, and the second was Representative number 7, Fatima. Aya recognized Reinhold as the one who would hinder her the most. He openly showed his dislike for Aya and Sinachi because they weren't human. The Iron Man then led everyone down to the basement to enter the room containing the diamond. This place required 3 keys and 4 people to push the door open. The Penultimate Night was kept in an intricately designed safe. However, the diamond was only a synthetic product, so it wasn't worth much money. Aya noticed the safe was made of silver, a metal that both vampires and werewolves disliked. The diamond inside must carry a history. 20 years ago, a friend of Iron Man excavated a diamond from a 14th century relic. He placed the diamond in a safe and gave it to Iron Man, who took 10 years to decipher its sophisticated mechanism to retrieve the diamond. On the diamond's surface were some inscriptions translated by Aya, specifically mentioning werewolves. After investigating the diamond's origin, Iron Man learned that in southern Germany, there was once a thriving dwarf tribe that had been exterminated by the werewolf tribe. They were so resentful that, to seek revenge, they passed down to their descendants the location of their enemy's hideout through an unbreakable diamond and a silver safe that the enemy couldn't touch. Now, about the room. Besides the locks mentioned above, the room has a microphone for communication with the outside. A spiral-shaped air vent on the ceiling, blocked by an iron mesh to ensure humans can't pass through. That's enough exploration for today. Before leaving, Sherlock whispered something to Iron Man. Sinachi asked Aya if she had any way to deal with Lupin, and she had thought of one method. On the afternoon of January 19th, Sinachi's group went to sit by the river. Aya said she wanted to visit the wax museum, so Shizuku went to ask for directions, following a map. Meanwhile, Watson's assistant and Sherlock's brother realized the person sitting in front of them wasn't Sherlock based on the fact that Sherlock's real nails weren't that long, and the real Sherlock was right behind them. That person removed his mask, revealing himself as the master thief Lupin. Sinachi's group was following the map to the museum when Sinachi thought of greeting Sherlock, only to discover that Aya had disappeared. He accidentally picked up someone else's birdcage and got punched by Shizuku. Lupin at this point asserted that there was no lock he couldn't break, then jumped into a car driven by a phantom and escaped, almost hitting Maid Shizuku while talking. She asked if they had seen a birdcage. Being a girl simp, Lupin invited Shizuku to join him in the car to search together. Sinachi accidentally met Annie again, so they also went together to search. At his brother's house, Sherlock reminded him to be careful with the insurance representatives because he had a feeling they weren't trustworthy. But the ones who influenced their work the most were Sinachi and Aya's group, because the Penultimate Night was the clue to tracking down the werewolf tribe, so they might not prevent the diamond from being stolen and might even try to steal it themselves. On the street, the person who mistakenly took Aya's cage had realized it and was startled to see her. He threw the cage onto the road, causing Aya to be hit by a car. But in this misfortune came greater misfortune, as the car that hit her belonged to the criminal twins from before. Somehow these two had escaped the police, but they had had designs on Aya since first seeing her. At this moment, Shizuku arrived and saw Aya lying on the twins' car, so she swerved to chase after them. Annie and Sinachi were also searching nearby when they spotted Aya and Shizuku, so he gave chase. Shinichi leapt onto the rooftops and jumped straight down to where the twins were, successfully rescuing Aya and returning her to the cage. Lupin recognized them as the Birdcage Messengers group, and Aya also recognized Lupin as he was wearing an outfit identical to Sherlock's. Shinichi introduced his alias as the Demon Assassin, but when pronounced, it meant he was stronger than Lupin, making Lupin want to learn from him. He threw marbles and slid on them to attack. The two young men danced in the air for a while before returning to the ground. Shinichi was hit in the forehead with a marble, and as a result took an uppercut to the jaw and collapsed. Lupin warned Aya's group to stay away from this matter, but he didn't know that everything was within her calculations. The Big Ben clock then struck 8 o'clock. Everyone had to go through a search before entering Iron Man's mansion. When the French inspector arrived, Sherlock pulled his beard to check if he was Lupin in disguise before shaking hands and leading him inside. Entering the room, Aya's group had left a letter for Sherlock saying they would be responsible for security on the ground. Sherlock ignored it, thinking that only monsters understand what monsters think. Reinhold refused to stay in this dusty room and also demanded to keep watch on the ground. Sherlock knew this was to make it easier to catch Lupin, so he let it be. Thus, only 6 people remained in the room. There were still 3 hours until the appointed time, but everyone decided to close the door early. All sat around the silver safe, waiting to see what Lupin would do. 10 o'clock, suddenly there was an explosion in the moat below. Hearing rumors that an officer's uniform had been stolen, Sherlock immediately drew his gun and shot all the locks, rendering them useless. Now this room was completely sealed off, no one could get in or out. Even if a locksmith were called, it would take 5 hours to break through. Sherlock came up with this idea because Lupin had claimed he could break any lock. But it wouldn't be an issue if the lock itself couldn't be opened in the first place. The people around who heard this thought Sherlock was truly a genius. At 10:55, as there was still no sign of trouble, Iron Man suggested that Sherlock and Watson place their hands on the safe. At 11:10, the room began to shake. The earlier explosion had caused water from the moat to flood in through the air vent. Sherlock realized he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He had been manipulated by Lupin, leading to the decision to destroy the locks. Now there was no way to escape at all. Upon hearing that people were trapped in the basement, Reinhold sent Phantom down to rescue them while he stayed to keep watch on Lupin. The uncles down there knew for certain that the water couldn't completely fill the room, so they weren't panicking too much yet. They planned to cling to the statues on the ceiling when the water rose, and Phantom had arrived to break down the door to help them escape. However, when all the water drained away, the safe had truly disappeared, and the exact time was 11:30. No one knew how Lupin had stolen the safe, even though it was clear that the room couldn't be entered or exited freely. They wanted to go warm up their bodies first before figuring out what to do next. But when they returned to the fireplace and started to plan, Sherlock asked to borrow handcuffs from the French inspector and then cuffed him. Sherlock knew he was Lupin in disguise because when walking on the bridge, his footsteps didn't cause the creaking sound of the bridge, so the beer belly was fake. Lupin confessed immediately, and the way he had stolen the safe was by threading a rope through the flowing water, and he, inside the room, tied the rope to the safe for his accomplices to pull out. Lupin took off his mask, but was still confident he had won. However, that safe didn't contain the diamond as Sherlock had switched its location, and the real diamond was in the pocket over there. But when they looked, it wasn't there. Lupin had managed to keep it in his hand and used a smoke bomb to escape. The entire mansion was then in chaos looking for Lupin, but he had escaped using a stolen guard uniform. Lupin was described as a thief similar to a character in Japanese legend, Ishikawa Gomen. He was caught and executed by boiling, so his followers were angry and decided to steal all the pots in the world. Restaurants faced the biggest problem as they had no pots for their business. Meanwhile, Lupin and the Phantom met again, one with the diamond, one with the safe, but what was in the safe was actually Aya. According to Shinichi, the way they caught the pot thieves was to have someone sit inside to guard, and now they had used a similar method to deal with Lupin. After finishing the story, Shinichi bowed, and Aya revealed that Lupin had mistaken Annie for her at that time, so she deliberately encouraged Shinichi to lose to make Lupin overconfident. At dusk, she had met the Iron Man and asked to hide in the safe. She had to keep the safe tightly closed the whole time she was hiding to wait for this moment. Lupin knew he had been exposed, but was confident his phantom would handle Shinichi. But the phantom had run away, forcing Shizuku to give chase. Reinhold had also arrived and demanded to deal with everyone at once, but suddenly the bridge outside was destroyed, leaving them with no escape route. However, the one who destroyed the bridge wasn't Lupin, but the group of the man carrying the M-shaped staff. He had led people here to find Lupin. The members of his group were all non-human creatures. He only aimed for the diamond, while how his old friends would be dealt with was up to them. They then began to split up to massacre. Reinhold attacked Lupin but also aimed at Shinichi. He had to dodge and use Lupin's escape to distract Reinhold. He chased after Lupin and demanded the diamond back, so Lupin threw it away, forcing Reinhold to go after the diamond while Shinichi chased Lupin. Sherlock and Dr. Watson also arrived and heard the situation from Aya. When she heard about a group of strangers attacking, she asked Sherlock to take her along as her knowledge might be helpful. The Phantom, having escaped from Shizuku, encountered Phantom. She was hunting the Phantom because his name was on the list of those who needed to be eliminated. She took out 2 crossbows and forced the Phantom to reveal his face, but hiding didn't help the Phantom escape her arrows. Meanwhile, Sherlock and Aya had reached the library where many people had been massacred. Looking at the perpetrator's face, Sherlock recognized him as a Leicester, who had recently been in the news for creating various fanatical cults scattered throughout London. These cults specialized in performing brutal rituals. Sherlock had seen through the trick of his finger snapping, which was to flick out a poison needle. Seeing that both of them had figured out his trick, he decided they needed to be eliminated. Meanwhile, the inspector accidentally encountered a vampire woman. She wasn't afraid of his weak gun, so Shizuku came to help. However, Shizuku was still on her mission to find the Phantom, so she asked if either of them had seen him. Neither knew, so she was about to leave, but the vampire woman wouldn't allow it. At the same time, Reinhold, Lupin, and Shinichi were still in a 3-way chase, with the diamond as their target. All 3 chased into a church and accidentally dropped the diamond there. Lupin proposed to cooperate with Shinichi. Reinhold then entered, and Shinichi began to distract him with conversation, causing him to lose focus and allowing Lupin the opportunity to push an entire piano onto his head. During this time, the Phantom had started using the darkness to outmaneuver Phantom. As the Phantom was very skilled at controlling sound, Phantom couldn't determine his location to shoot. Shizuku had begun to lose ground against the immortal vampire. Although she had silver weapons that could wound the vampire, hitting her was a problem. What Shizuku didn't expect was that the vampire's blood was poisonous. The poison got on Shizuku and caused her to be enchanted by the vampire. Sherlock, after a gunfight with magic, found himself short on ammunition. Aya had asked why they needed the diamond, and they simply wanted to find werewolves to increase their forces. While chatting, Sherlock had grabbed his cane to find a Leicester and knocked away the needle aimed at his face. He managed to take out the antidote, but at that moment, the mastermind appeared. According to Sherlock, he was Professor Moriarty. On Shinichi's side, Reinhold was still alive. Suddenly, the Phantom and Phantom fell right in, and another member from the professor's group also showed up. He used magic to snatch the diamond in an instant and quickly dealt with the 2 insurance representatives. Lupin and the Phantom had already fled, knowing they couldn't retrieve the diamond from that monster. Aya was surprised by the name Moriarty, as this was the name of a criminal organization's leader who was supposed to have died long ago. He was holding Aya's body for research, and after 8 years, he had returned to create an even larger criminal gang than before. He did this by gathering all sorts of abnormal beings and even taking on an unimaginable student. This person had begged him for a monster's body, so he taught him knowledge about transplant surgery. The person he was referring to was someone they were all too familiar with, the one who had committed comprehensive crimes 11 years ago, Jack the Ripper. This Jack was now facing off against Shinichi. Shinichi had engaged in a brief exchange and noticed that Jack was somewhat similar to him. Professor Moriarty revealed that he and Jack had gone to Japan to find samples of demons and immortal people. By transplanting demons and cells from immortal people, he could create a formidable warrior with incredible regenerative abilities. He had experimented on many subjects, most of whom went mad from the demon's power, so he had adjusted for balance before operating on Jack. He had realized that Aya's immortal body was also a type of demon hybrid, so she must have been surgically altered by someone in the past. She admitted this and expressed her dislike for the person who gave her this immortality. He had used cells from her to make Jack immune to demon cells. From there, he began taking Jack everywhere to implant other species into him. As a result, he now had vampire characteristics but wasn't afraid of silver and could walk in sunlight. Now he was aiming for werewolf characteristics. In short, he now had a creature with a human body, immortality, demonic attacking power, and vampire regeneration abilities. However, this seemingly invincible creature still had a weakness, Shinichi. Although Jack had beaten Shinichi badly, Shinichi's blows still left certain injuries on Jack and prevented his recovery ability. Jack then remembered that Shinichi was Moriarty's escaped specimen, while Shinichi recalled Jack as the person always by that old man's side. Shinichi revealed that he had chased them here to perform, causing Jack to decide to ignore Shinichi rather than take his life. The vampire woman was now trying to seduce Shizuku. She quickly grabbed a nearby crucifix and stabbed the vampire with it, causing her intense pain and making her want to finish Shizuku off. However, Jack fired a flare to signal everyone to leave. The professor, seeing that Jack had gotten what he wanted, also called Alester and Franken to leave. Before leaving, he revealed the name of the organization he was building, Night Feast. Shinichi then reunited with Sherlock's group and Aya. Shizuku also returned safely. They didn't know where Lupin's group had gone, but Sherlock knew Lupin had used the sewers to escape because the water in the moat had been partially drained, allowing him to escape. As for the safe, it seemed Lupin had taken the opportunity to steal it, but Shinichi wanted them to watch his performance. Jack had returned to the organization and was about to take out the diamond for the professor to see, but his clothes had torn without him noticing. Shinichi now held the diamond that he had quickly snatched from Jack. Aya had then decoded that poem. She asked Sherlock to hold the diamond up to the light, and from within, a line of text appeared, Fang Forest. It seemed that was where the werewolves lived. Shinichi remembered Jack had done something similar, so Night Feast might also know this information. Years ago, two werewolf mother and child were hunted by villagers. They had to hide in a tower, but the villagers wouldn't let them go and burn down the entire tower to kill them both. Back to the present, Aya's group had set out for Fang Forest in southern Germany. Aya wanted them to be careful as they might be ambushed by Moriarty's people. Aya had encountered werewolves once before. Werewolves could transform between three forms. In human form, they were hardly different from humans. In beastman form, they were slightly superior to humans. But in full wolf form, their senses were significantly improved, and their skin was tough enough to resist gunfire. Suddenly, while walking, Aya's group encountered a bearded man. He recognized all three as detectives who investigated monsters and begged for help, as a girl from the village had been taken by a werewolf. When they entered the village, they were avoided by the villagers. Aya asked the uncle to recount the whole story. Specifically, a year ago, the village chief's granddaughter was taken and found dead in the forest the next day. Her head and back were broken, her face was mangled and deformed, one arm was gnawed clean, and her body was full of bite marks. 4 months later, the miller's daughter was the next to be taken, and her condition was equally horrific. Another 4 months passed, and the flour mill owner's daughter was the next victim. All three incidents occurred on rainy nights. The marks found on the bodies were all the same, and the identifying characteristics of the corpses all matched. Another thing was that yesterday, another little girl was taken. The father had broken down the door to rush in, but the culprit had taken the girl and escaped through the window. However, it hadn't rained yesterday. 8 years ago, the villagers had driven werewolves out of the village before any disaster occurred. When brought to the church, the girl's father was caught suspecting an outsider of being a werewolf. But there were 3 outsiders, so such reasoning couldn't hold. The detective group arrived, and Aya didn't encourage them to look at the girl's true form, but they still looked and were shocked. The missing girl's father called Aya a monster, but only she could solve the case, so he had to listen. Aya then asked to see the crime scene and noticed it was very messy. The fireplace wasn't lit last night, so the culprit must have entered through it. From the size and footprints, it could be deduced it was a beast man. She then asked the bearded uncle to bring her tooth marks from the previous corpses and asked him to request Shizuku to bring her a ball the size of her head. She then asked the mother what they did last night. They just went about their normal routine. Of the 2 windows, one was securely locked, and the broken one was fixed and couldn't be opened. The direction of the culprit's escape was apparent. Shizuku then arrived and was asked to go on the roof to observe if there were any traces. When there was nothing, she told Shizuku to throw something down. Dust rose in a cloud, and the uncle brought back the tooth marks. Aya could then conclude that this incident wasn't caused by a crazed werewolf running amok, but by someone with reason. There was blood on the bed but no blood on the escape route, so the culprit must have brought a bag to put the girl in. Additionally, the storehouse lock was also broken, and it was known that a year ago it had been broken into and guns and ammunition had been stolen. Since this coincided with the first incident, it needed to be considered. The entire group then went to the village chief's house, and he had information about the Nan forest and the werewolves' dwelling. He also knew about that diamond, so Aya decided to negotiate with him. She would capture and resolve the werewolf case in this village in exchange for information from him. According to the village chief, among the 3 suspects in the village, there was only 1 doctor, 1 engineer, and 1 artist. All 3 were outsiders who came to the village. The way to detect werewolves was to place fragrant flowers or tap pots near their ears to startle them due to their heightened senses, but all 3 showed no reaction. Werewolves can control their blood, reproduction, and characteristics, which has made modern werewolves no longer fear silver and holy water. So now, the only way to eliminate a werewolf is to kill it in human form. But if the werewolf king is born, all conventional methods will become ineffective. The Werewolf King is a legend about werewolves eventually giving birth to an individual considered a god of the werewolf clan. He had previously seen werewolves immune to silver. In the past, a werewolf mother and child had come to the village and deceived everyone. But fortunately, the little girl Lewis, who was just kidnapped, had discovered them and helped drive the werewolves out of the village. Since then, the little girl has been regarded as the guardian deity of the village. It's a pity that the girl has now also been kidnapped by the unidentified culprit. To learn more, the group of messengers went to the engineer's house. About 13 years ago, he had found a pregnant woman injured deep in the forest. He learned that the girl's name was Rose and thought she was a servant from some family who had an affair with the master and was driven away. At that time, the villagers were quite tolerant, so he brought her to the village to care for her. Half a year later, she gave birth to a daughter named Jet. Rose mostly lived at home and was an intelligent and generous person. Life was peaceful until one day, due to their similar appearance, Rose mistook Lewis for her daughter and revealed her werewolf identity. The villagers then burned both mother and child alive, and this engineer himself confirmed the 2 skeletons of the 2 werewolf mother and child. The engineer trusts the doctor, so there's only 1 suspect left, the female artist. The detective group then went to the female artist's house. 5 years ago, she came here to paint waterfalls, and because the scenery was so beautiful, she has stayed here ever since. The parents of the victims had asked her to paint memorial portraits for their children. In the artist's opinion, the culprit seems to be just a wild wolf. Occasionally, early in the morning or at sunset, she had seen it a wolf with an unusually golden coat. Only she had seen the wolf because she lives on the outskirts of the village, so now she has also become the prime suspect. It's unclear whether this female artist is the culprit or not, but Aya knows she lied about living in an artist's family and graduating from an art school. The way she holds her pen is unlike a real artist, so Aya saw through it. She had to explain that because she's now an orphan and often discriminated against, she lied to avoid embarrassment, as she had been abandoned since childhood. While the detective group was busy investigating where the engineer had found Rose, the night party group was observing them from afar. In the evening, Aya was present at the uncle doctor's house. He was the one who heard Lewis's scream when she was taken away. Aya suddenly asked about how Lewis's parents treated the little girl, as she had seen Lewis's wheelchair. The wheels and armrests were dirty, but the handles at the back were extremely clean. Lewis had also learned to be independent, So perhaps Lewis's parents didn't care about the little girl at all. Aya asked if Lewis had ever gone out alone. Mostly not, but he remembered about a year and a half ago, Lewis had gone missing. And it wasn't until dusk that the villagers discovered her wheelchair stuck in a mud pile by the riverbank, preventing her from moving. When asked why she went out alone, the little girl said she wanted to go to the artist's house. Aya now understood more about the situation in this village. Suddenly, two guests came to visit. They immediately started fighting, and the two who came were numbers 3 and 4 from the insurance organization. They came here to find the werewolf. But now even if they steal the diamond, they don't know how to use it. Sunachi revealed that only the village chief knows how to use it, and he had promised to tell Aya if she successfully solves the case. The two sides decided to cease fire, and number 3 wanted Aya to solve the case quickly. Aya then had to continue treating Sunachi, and he noticed Shizuku seemed jealous of him. Suddenly, he discovered villagers running to surround the female artist's house. She shouted for everyone to stay away and confessed to being the culprit who had eaten all the victims. She then transformed into a wolf and charged out. Number 3 shot a silver bullet, but it had no effect, and she escaped. The detective group chased after and fought with the female artist. Sunachi handed Aya to Shizuku for safekeeping and jumped in to fight. Numbers 3 and 4 also arrived and fired some shots. When Shizuku went to help, the female artist dodged her and rushed to throw Aya into the stream. Shizuku lunged forward, pushing Aya back and letting herself fall into the waterfall. Although the culprit escaped, the village chief still agreed to share how to use the diamond. Go to the village entrance, stand where the burned tower is, and wait for the sunlight to shine through the first letter of the poem engraved on the diamond for results. The detective group and the insurance group followed these instructions and revealed the location of the werewolf village in Nan Forest. The night party group, seeing the developments, also prepared. Shizuku had now regained consciousness. She had drifted downstream and was rescued by a werewolf named Nora, who asked two close friends to warm her up, helping her overcome the critical condition. Shizuku noticed that this werewolf village slept at noon in the middle of the night, with a lifestyle opposite to humans. Werewolves don't allow humans into the village, so Shizuku needed to leave as soon as possible. At the same time, Shizuku also learned that in this werewolf village, there was a serial killing case where the victims were young girls on rainy days. Since her gun wasn't the type used on the bodies, they believed she wasn't the culprit. She wanted them to wait for Aya to arrive because Aya could solve the case. But the more people who entered the village, the more difficult it would be, so Nora thought it would be better if Shizuku left. She then made tea for the 3 female werewolves to drink. They all praised it, and Shizuku wanted to know more about the case. It was learned that it started a year ago, with deaths occurring every 4 months, and now there were 3 victims. The victims died from being shot in the chest, and the men in the village always lost track of the culprit because the rain erased all traces. Each time, no one heard gunshots. So far, they only knew the culprit used a handgun, was very good at ambushing, and knew how to erase traces perfectly. In general, Shizuku couldn't investigate anything, so they wanted to get her out of there and needed to find a place with water to help Shizuku erase her scent. Nora would lure the men away so the 2 friends could find a way to get Shizuku out. On the way, Shizuku learned that no girl in this village could escape because they would be caught by the men. All girls in the village would be forced by the village chief to become priestesses to improve the breed. Suddenly, the men were still there, so the 2 girls had to pretend in front of them. Just as they managed to pass by, a small mistake revealed Shizuku's identity among the werewolves. She was chased and eventually surrounded by the large number. She spoke up to defend the 2 girls so they wouldn't be prosecuted. The village elder came and wanted to deal with Shizuku immediately, but the 2 girls argued that Nora had saved Shizuku and wanted to see what she had to say. They then took her to the wood hill for questioning. The one judging whether she was lying or not would be the village elder. It had been a long time since they built the wood hill since Rose's case. No matter how she explained, the village elder still considered her to be lying. The 2 girls also spoke up in Shizuku's defense. Suddenly, in the middle of the trial, a gunshot rang out. The whole clan rushed into the forest to find Nora shot dead. Today it wasn't raining, but they still couldn't smell any traces of the culprit. The old woman again blamed Shizuku, but the men argued that Shizuku had been held on the wood hill the whole time, so how could she have done it? The werewolves didn't know what to do, so they let Shizuku examine the scene. There was very little blood around, so Shizuku guessed this wasn't where the culprit acted. Nora's body was wet, but her clothes were dry, meaning she had been soaking somewhere before putting on clothes, then was shot and the body moved here. There was a gunshot mark on a nearby tree, so 2 shots were fired, but only one made a sound. Seeing that Shizuku couldn't help much, the werewolves decided to deal with her because they wouldn't let anyone else into the village. Elsewhere, Aya's group was moving when they were attacked by Franken. He pulled both Sanachi and Aya down a cliff and cut off the insurance group. Franken then informed them that he had helped both of them shake off the insurance group, so he wanted the location of the werewolf village in return. Even knowing the location, Franken still feared Sanachi might be lying, so he demanded to hold the diamond as a guarantee. If they met at the werewolf village, he would return it. Then they went their separate ways. Sanachi and Aya arrived at the werewolf village, which was holding a funeral for Nora. With the help of a female werewolf, Sanachi and Aya met Shizuku in the prison. Aya asked about Shizuku's investigation results and praised her for doing well. The men caught their scent and decided to check the prison. To avoid chaos, Shizuku decided to temporarily stay in prison, while Sanachi took Aya to investigate the crime scene. The werewolves soon caught their scent and gave chase, but Aya told Sanachi to go around a sharp rock so she could observe. She helped Sanachi find a switch, and both managed to enter a tunnel before the werewolves arrived. This was how the culprit concealed their traces after each crime. There was still blood down here, and the culprit's gun was also here, so the victims must have been killed here and their bodies moved to the surface. Aya recognized this as the gun Lewis's father had lost from storage. Going further, they discovered Nora's blood trail and a lake. One corner looked like someone had been there. On the wall, there was a carved schedule, and they needed to go further to learn more. Meanwhile, someone in the human village accidentally discovered Lewis's body. The detective group found the female artist's body next to a tunnel leading to the human village. Now Aya understood that Rose had used this tunnel to reach the human village years ago. Both met the doctor uncle again and heard about Lewis's body being found. Meeting Lewis's parents, Aya asked how they had treated Lewis before she became the guardian deity. Lewis was seen as a burden then because she couldn't walk on her own. 8 years ago, Lewis's parents had intended to abandon her. They left her in the forest, but unexpectedly, Jet, Rose's daughter, brought Lewis back to the village that very night. Lewis then exposed the werewolf mother and daughter's identity that same night. Basically, Lewis was abandoned, Jet saved Lewis, and Lewis betrayed Jet to prove useful to the village so she wouldn't be abandoned. Lewis was very smart because if she hadn't exposed them, the villagers would have investigated and revealed that her parents had tried to abandon her. Aya now began to understand and decided to return to the werewolf village once more. Both used the tunnel to return and conveniently reviewed some things along the way. Numbers 3 and 4 also discovered the tunnel and decided to call the entire village. The vampire had entered the village and started corrupting it. Sanachi's group had already freed Shizuku from prison. Aya wanted to return to the village because she had more to clarify. She asked the female werewolf again if it was true that the villagers here lived at night and lived separately. Upon confirmation, she assigned Sanachi to distract the werewolves. The men, hearing that Shizuku had escaped, began to act. Franken and Alester, hearing the howl, also acted immediately. Sanachi discovered 3 werewolves chasing him. He defeated them one by one using clever tactics. Aya had now reached the werewolf clan's cemetery to determine the final clue. The werewolf village was suddenly set on fire. Numbers 3 and 4 had led the villagers to take revenge on the werewolves. The 3-night party members had begun slaughtering werewolves. Aya had asked the female werewolf to dig up Nora's body for her to examine. She told Shizuku to return to help the werewolves. She returned to find the remaining female werewolf but encountered the vampire. Number 4 now faced Franken and began a verbal duel. Number 3 encountered the magician. After a while, Aya had understood the whole issue and would return to the village to explain. While the other 2 sides were fighting, Number 4 had chained Franken, but Sanachi had come to help Franken. Number 4 was quite skilled with chains, making it difficult for Sunachi to deal with. Seeing Sunachi in trouble, Franken tore off his own arm and threw it to Sunachi, who kicked it to knock out the young man who had arrived. He demanded the diamond back from Franken and asked about Aya's body. He learned it was still being preserved in the night party's nest in London. Number 3 and Alester were still fighting at a distance. Number 3 threw a shovel up and shot at an angle to hit Alester with the ricochet. Here, the vampire discovered that Shizuku wasn't wearing underwear, but she didn't want to talk about it. The vampire informed Shizuku that because she had previously been exposed to her poison, she now had antibodies in her body. Shizuku wasn't sure if this was true, so the vampire gave her a mark on her leg. Shizuku fell under her charm again, but the vampire said that what she told her was true, and this was just an illusion. She then left, sparing Shizuku this time. On the other side, number 3 thought she had eaten Alester, but he had switched bodies and gave her a needle. Sunachi and Aya went to meet Shizuku again. Sunachi wanted to solve the case, but Aya had something for him to do. Outside, the people of the 2 villages were preparing for a general combat. Finally, Aya arrived and called for everyone to stop. She announced that she had found the culprit for both cases. The perpetrator was standing right on the wooden hill, who was both Louis and Nora, none other than Rose's daughter, Jet. Returning to the crime scene in the room where Louis was caught, the evidence showed that no one had entered the room, but there were traces of someone jumping out of the window in wolf form. The footprints at the fireplace should have had dust around them if someone had intruded through the chimney, but the area was clean, so it could only have been staged. When she learned that Jet and Louis were similar, she suspected that Jet from the past was still alive. That night, the artist who turned into a wolf was actually Jet in disguise, as the teeth marks on Sunachi's leg matched those in all the cases in the human village. It seems the artist was killed right after she and Sunachi left after investigating. As for Nora's body found last night, it was actually killed in the cave, because if humans had passed through, they would need a lamp, and lamps attract moths down there. Only werewolves can walk in the dark without getting moth dust on them. So that body of Nora was also created by Jet. The person who had lived in the cave and was shot dead by Jet was quite short and had lived there for a year and a half, coinciding with the time Louis disappeared before. So she was sure the person killed last night was Louis, not the Nora they knew, because the two looked very similar. In general, years ago, Jet was helped by Rose to escape to the werewolf village and changed her name to Nora, but also played the role of Louis to live in the human village. There are 5 reasons for her to assert this. First, the 2 villages hardly interacted with each other. Second, the tunnel helped Jet take only over an hour to move between the 2 villages. Third, the living schedules in the 2 villages were opposite. Fourth, Louis usually had little interaction with the village, and Nora lived alone, so no one would recognize them. Fifth, there was a lake in the tunnel that helped Jet erase her scent when switching between the 2 identities. When they returned to the human village, Louis's body was discovered. Jet had dug up Louis's body, bitten and torn it chaotically, then concealed the gunshot wound. In other words, Jet being alive was the culprit for the 2 cases in the werewolf village and the human village. Aya felt that Jet had become too obsessed with revenge. 13 years ago, Rose had escaped from this werewolf village and came to the human village. Several months later, Jet was born. After living for some time, they were discovered by Louis, who exposed their identity, causing both to be burned to death. But Jet had survived and escaped to the werewolf village. The small skeleton found was that of a fox in the tower. Jet had come here and changed her name to Nora, but still hated this village, so she planned to create conflict between the 2 villages. So, a year and a half ago, Jet had kidnapped Louis, but Louis also hated that village, so he agreed to help Jet take revenge. Thus, Jet lived with 2 identities and gathered information. A year ago, she caused consecutive murders to increase the hostility between the 2 villages and staged events to erase her traces. But when the detective group arrived, things went wrong. Jet had chosen the artist to frame and then escaped. She then saved Shizuku and deliberately planned for Shizuku to be exposed. And while the whole village was interrogating, she went to the tunnel, killed Louis, and then brought the body up here to create a fake crime scene. She shot at the tree to help Shizuku not be suspected as the culprit. When everyone thought she was dead, she had gone to dig up Lewis's body to bring back to the human village and then opened a hidden path to lead the two villages into conflict. But Jet thought Aya was still wrong. She then left and encountered Sinachi in the tunnel. He had been waiting there to catch her, but she revealed that she was actually the werewolf king, so she extinguished the candles to ambush him. However, he managed to knock her into the lake and tied her up while she fur was puffed out. Aya came and informed that the two villages had settled things. Aya wanted Sinachi to release Jet because she had reasoned incorrectly. Jet didn't carry out the plan for revenge, but to liberate the witch women from the fate set by the village elder. The fact that she was both the Wolf King and a witch woman made it hard for anyone to imagine what her fate would be later. So she wanted to free people like her from that harsh fate and help them escape. By repeatedly reusing corpses from the human side to fake deaths on the werewolf side, she had saved 3 people by sacrificing 3 others. Because of her wrong conclusion, Aya would let her go, and if there's a chance, they would meet again. Aya felt this was the first time she was wrong and let a criminal go. She knew both villages had learned their own lessons, but was sure nothing would change. The movie ends here, and we'll have to wait until part 2 to know what happens next. Goodbye for now.